Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Choice Series webinar, Cannabis Law. The Career Choice Series is designed to give law students, young lawyers, and transitioning attorneys a general overview of a practice area and ways to position yourself to get there. The Career Choice Series is brought to you by the ABA Career Center, Law Student Division, Young Lawyers Division, and the Government and Public Sector Lawyers Division. The Young Lawyers Division is here to help new lawyers navigate the early years of their career and law students prepare for life after law school. The Government and Public Sector Lawyers Division's mission is to serve the nation's public lawyers by promoting integrity and excellence among public advocates, providing meaningful services not obtainable elsewhere, and by highlighting the extraordinary work of public lawyers. GPSLD works to enhance the position of public lawyers, create camaraderie within the public sector, and provide representation within the ABA for public lawyers. The Law Student Division offers premium benefits, which includes access and savings for equanimity.com, discounts on bar review programs, up to $50 off West academic casebooks, and a legal ethics bundle that includes a free model rules of professional conduct ebook. Upgrade to premium for $25. Sign up today for abalawstudents.com/go premium. The ABA Career Center offers both career development resources and a job board for law students and legal professionals across all disciplines and career stages. Moderating our program today is ABA Career Center Chair Betsy Munell. She is a business development coach for lawyers and law firms, and she was a partner, deal maker, and rainmaker at Edwards, Angell and Palmer and Dodge, now Locklord, for 25 years. Betsy is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, where she serves as a visiting JD advisor. She chairs the board of the ABA Career Center. Moving forward, we'll let Betsy introduce today's panelists.
Thank you, Joshua. I am delighted to be here today. We've got a couple of really exceptional panelists, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. We have Hillary Bricken, who works at her own firm, Harris Bricken, and joined in 2010, and since then has earned a reputation as an exceptional and fearless business law attorney. Hillary's clients include startups, entrepreneurs, and companies in all stages of development, and value her bold approach to business strategy. Hillary also appears before city councils and community forums where she advocates tirelessly for her clients, and she is a true standout in the cannabis law sector. And if any of you would like to try to keep up with developments in both the law and industry, you can follow her on Canna Law blog. We also have Kat Packer, who is the executive director and general manager of the Department of Cannabis Regulation in California. Prior to joining the city of Los Angeles, Kat served as California Policy Coordinator for the Drug Policy Alliance, where she worked to ensure the successful and equitable implementation of various cannabis policy reforms. So we're going to get started at this point, and we're going to be asking Hillary and Kat to fill us in on various aspects of their careers and their perception of ways in which a young lawyer can access this very exciting and fast-growing industry specialization. So let me turn to Hillary and Kat. I'm going to ask Kat to begin and give us a sense of what your career is like. What does it mean to be cannabis specialized in your career? Kat, do you want to start us off?
Sure, and thank you. Serving as the executive director of the Department of Cannabis Regulation, as we move forward with what society is going to treat as legalization and commercialization, particularly here in the state of California, has been a particularly interesting ride. Part of my responsibility is coordinating with a number of different local and state elected officials to try and advise on various cannabis policies, as well as coordinating with a number of public agencies, primarily at the local and state level, to issue licenses for the first time for cannabis businesses here in the city of Los Angeles. And the city of Los Angeles has been regarded as one of the largest, if not the largest, cannabis markets in the world. And because we're moving out of a system of prohibition to legalization and commercialization, that means that government has to change the way that it engages on a day-to-day and long-term strategy with cannabis policy, and I'm a part of facilitating that conversation. I started off working primarily in policy. I had an opportunity to work for the Drug Policy Alliance, which is an organization that works on all different types of drug policy reform, but really joined this conversation a few years ago here in California with the passage of the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. And so I found a lot of joy in this career and this work, but I think that it absolutely requires a great deal of enthusiasm and patience as we move forward with navigating what can be a number of legal ironies as we move forward, I guess in 2020 for cannabis policy.
Thank you. Hillary.
Well, I'm probably on the opposite side of the aisle from Kat. I don't deal with any policy at all. I actually deal with businesses, their transactional issues, mergers and acquisitions, securities, the tax impact, basically a full service business practice, somewhat dedicated to cannabis businesses, but really more regulated substances. Cannabis has just kind of hit the peak of our attention because it is so fast moving and ever expanding from state to state. And from my perspective, I very quickly got licensed in the state of Washington, the state of California, and the state of Florida. And I have practiced in the business sector only in all three of those states, going on what this October will be my 10th year of practice. And I can tell you that each year, with legalization, medicalization, even the advent of hemp CBD, the business clientele has gotten more sophisticated. Institutional money is starting to enter the space. The ancillary sector, which is innovation, technology, equipment, hardware, real estate, have always been really kind of fascinating areas because they're always impacted by the cannabis regulations at the state and local level, and obviously federal illegality. I think it's a wonderful area for young lawyers to explore because it is so new. And even with California having had medical cannabis since 1996, there's still room for improvement on the legal side. And all the time, we need very good, highly skilled attorneys in these kind of niche areas to come in and provide their expertise. So there's still a lot of room for improvement. And I sincerely hope that lawyers will continue to explore joining the space and assisting on the business, regulatory, and organizational side because the clients really need the help.
This is leading us into one of the questions I've just seen in the question box that I'm monitoring. And if you guys could speak a little bit more on your career paths to answer it, that would be great. And the question is, what suggestions do you have for law students trying to get into the industry? Who wants to start that one?
I can take it. This is, oh, sorry, Kat. Just to chime in really quick, the one thing I would have done differently as a law student is I would have taken as many administrative law classes as I could have stomached to learn better the constitutional issues around rulemaking, how to challenge rulemaking, the procedures around rulemaking, because that is a very unique area with a federal overlay, but every state obviously kind of has a copycat Administrative Procedure Act that you have to know backwards and forwards if you're going to take on a regulatory approach.
And I would echo that. I wish I would have taken more administrative law courses too, even on the public policy side. But I also have a master's in public policy. But I think that part of what allowed me to step into this role so quickly, and what I would encourage young lawyers to do as well, is that sometimes you have to actually be willing to go where the action is and to step into a new space where there is reform happening, because as the conversation is constantly evolving, there are markets that open up on a regular basis. And I think that the ability for folks to be able to be one of the first to market, even as a lawyer, has been critically important to many of the different attorneys that I've seen in this space.
That's interesting. One of the questions that we've got here is from somebody who said, well, what if I live in an illegal state now, but I see it on the horizon? What should I do to prepare myself for the legalization of cannabis?
I think that there are opportunities as markets emerge and as markets come on board. And so I think that there is value in learning from other jurisdictions in the space. The nice thing is that we've hit a tipping point with the evolution of cannabis policy to the extent where I think that you can take snapshots of other jurisdictions and learn a lot, connect and network with those subject matter expertise, but then...
That's some background coming from somebody. Do we know where that's coming from? Okay. I'm sorry, Kat, why don't you go ahead?
So as other jurisdictions and markets are coming on board, those new jurisdictions need those subject matter experts as well. And so I think, as Hillary mentioned, traveling from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, there are nuances in what some of these state policies are. But part of what's happening also, I think, in the long term is this uniformity of cannabis policy. So I think that there could be reward in going to other jurisdictions to learn, but even the jurisdictions that are coming on board need the most help.
Right. That's very helpful. I think what we'll do is we'll come back and see if you guys have any more ideas to offer on your career path near the end of our discussion, and just move forward to a question that somebody's typing. I'm sorry, audience, but we have some background on our microphones that we need to figure out. But let's talk about how regulators and lawyers actually work together to create and shape policy. Do you want to start that, Kat?
Sure. So the reality is that many of the folks who are participating in the industry are the subject matter experts on their business and their business practice. And as a government official, and there are dozens of folks who are just like me who are responsible for managing their jurisdiction's program, we really do need to be able to hear from the folks who are impacted by the change of cannabis policies. And sometimes that can be very nuanced. Sometimes it's related to different business interests or financial interests, or just the ability to find a location of where to do business. But I think that part of what governments need more than anything is to be listening to stakeholders and figuring out what works for everyone. And that can be a difficult task because we're balancing a number of different considerations. There are business interests. As a local regulator, we're constantly engaging with communities, neighborhoods, and so we need to be able to hear from everyone in order to make balanced recommendations and to advise our electeds. And lawyers can be very influential and impactful in those conversations.
Hillary, what's your sense on this?
I totally echo that. And I will say in the past 10 years, the role of the lawyer has really evolved. And if you've ever dealt with regulated commodities, what that means is that your clients are going to be in constant contact with either enforcement officers or licensing analysts or regulators that are overseeing everything from the business operations to tax collection, remittance, and reporting. It's very comprehensive. So oftentimes, one of the lawyer's main roles is to help broker that relationship where it makes sense for doing business. So for example, here in the state of California, even though we have a ton of regulations, oftentimes a lot of those do not line up with the business interests of the client or even normal commercial practices. And sometimes the lawyer will assist the regulators in interpreting the rules in a way that's more commercially reasonable. And a really good example is in the M&A space. With cannabis licensing generally, as Kat pointed out, we're starting to kind of evolve into some uniform policies that are ubiquitous across all states. Changes of ownership are not straightforward, and that can make it really difficult in an acquisition to have even a single closing, let alone a closing that's going to be guaranteed to go through because the regulators have to weigh in on who's coming into the business. So the lawyer's job is to draft a purchase agreement or whatever the transaction is that not only complies with the rules, but that makes sense on the business side and for the transaction, which can be incredibly complicated, and you cannot do it without input from the regulators. So oftentimes the lawyer's role, most important role, is to be the go-between between the state and reality relative to the client.
So that means building relationships then with the regulators?
It oftentimes can. You may get a series of different regulators from transaction to transaction. What it really means is that you need to have an extreme grip and competence around the regulations and any changes to those regulations, and more importantly, changes and nuances to enforcement policies, which may not be codified, because when you talk to one licensing analyst versus another, you may get different answers, completely different answers that impact different clients. So you really have to have your head on a swivel.
Let me go from that, which is, thought-provoking, what both of you have said. For a young lawyer, that's intimidating. So if you're coming straight out of school, and let's use California as an example of a, mature environment that's been where cannabis has been legalized at the medical level for some time. What do you do to be most efficient? If you've decided this is an area I want to specialize in, what's your first step? How do you self-educate? How do you meet the people you should meet? Are there places, either nationally or state by state, where you convene with them, conventions, things like that? Could you guys speak to that a little bit? I think that's super practical.
From the practice side, I will tell you, you are delusional if you think you can do it all, because there's so many areas that are impacted by the regulatory overlay. So, for example, if you're doing M&A, you're probably not also doing land use, which is all relevant to securing licensure, changes of ownership, preserving the business. So pick an area within the niche and get really good at that area. And if you want to expand further, start building teams with people who have those skill sets that are traditional skill sets, where they can deal with the regulatory underpinnings, but do not try to do it all by yourself. You're going to be wading into multiple ethical issues, and you just frankly will not have the bandwidth.
Right, which is, I guess, true. And one of the reasons we do these career choice programs, I'm speaking to the audience right now, is to drive home that when you seek to differentiate yourself from the rest of the world, which is something that's all more compelling now and more so with every passing year, you can't do it just with a practice area necessarily. It's very difficult to do, to just be a land use lawyer or just be an M&A lawyer. It makes it it's more complex, but also probably more likely to result in success for you to also pick an industry. So I agree with Hillary for sure that if you're going to select cannabis as an industry that fascinates you and therefore would engage you for the process of becoming a successful lawyer, then you also want to make sure that you have a high skill set in a particular niche of practice area. And in Hillary's case, would you look at that as your M&A focus largely?
For me, it can go a little broader than that. It's mainly transactional work, and that can
transactional
include
in general.
M&A.
Yeah, got it. Great. Let's go to the next question. You can always come back to these things. How do you guys look at the future of cannabis policy and law? Kat, you want to start us up on this one?
Sure. So I think that the future of cannabis policy is going to be, it's actually happening right now. I really do think that we're at a tipping point in this conversation, both from a federal, state, and local level, where we have dozens of states who have medical provisions, many states who have adult use provisions. And part of what I appreciate largely about this policy area, because it's so interdisciplinary, is that the future of cannabis policy is going to have wide-ranging impacts on a number of different issues. Issues like criminal justice reform, issues like healthcare, economic opportunities for communities. And so I think that it's One, because the cannabis policy itself is largely being driven in the grander sense by a change in public policy or public opinion, but on a commercial sense by business interests. I think that we have both an opportunity and responsibility to make sure that cannabis policy is equitable, and so I hope that the future of cannabis policy is equity centered and equitable, and I also know that it's what we make it. And so I think that we have a responsibility to do that. That can be challenging as we navigate all of these other issues, but I think it'll be worthwhile.
Hillary?
Regarding the future of cannabis law, what I foresee is really multifold. First of all, I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation as bigger business interests enter the space. A lot of them are already here, like publicly traded companies from Canada and multi-state operators, and a lot of those companies have full-blown legal departments with general counsel that will only look for outside counsel for very specific needs and expertise, which is a nice segue into my next prediction, which is we're going to see other areas of cannabis emerge that are less 101 around licensing. For example, products liability. That's going to spike in the coming years, specifically probably around failure to warn relative to dangerous and defective products. We're going to see more litigation around ownership disputes and partnership disputes as these startups progress, most of which will probably fail. We'll see more M&A. We're going to see issues around data privacy and Internet of Things related to automated facilities, including technology and apps around delivery. That's what I think is going to happen. We're going to see more niches within the niche and probably consolidation across the bigger companies in dealing more with general counsel and less with outside attorneys that are representing multiple companies at one time.
Let me ask you a quick question. Do you see industry specialization breaking down and being divided between the hemp industry and the what soon to be hopefully legal cannabis industry that people think of when they think of cannabis?
I do. I think there's going to be a tremendous break, and my prediction is hemp CBD will be exclusively governed really by the USDA and the FDA.
Right.
Relative to cultivation and obviously hemp CBD products. On the cannabis side, which is kind of a scientific misnomer with hemp, that's going to be a state-by-state patchwork quilt, I think, with very little federal oversight if and when it is legalized, decriminalized, or rescheduled at the federal level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating how this is panning out. Kat, on the hemp side, obviously legalized. Do you agree with that? Is that something that comes in under state regulation at all right now, or is it an FDA concern?
I think that I agree with Hillary. I think that it's going to be primarily an FDA concern, but I think that the kind of scientific misnomer that she mentioned is absolutely true and present today. The reality is that there are a lot of local and state governments that are struggling to figure out how to manage the legalization of hemp.
Right.
And I think that there's going to be a lot of, we're already seeing present day ambiguity and kind of misclassification of hemp versus cannabis. And so I think that from an enforcement perspective and from a compliance perspective, we've kind of opened up a can of worms with the hemp conversation, and we're going to, as a local government and as a state government, we're kind of struggling to figure out where to place and how to manage that conversation.
Right. Incredibly hard to manage as you look at the wild west on all the hemp and CBD infused products. I just can't even imagine how it's going to get managed by the FDA at this point. Anyway, so let's move to the next question. We have two more questions we're going to try to fit in here. One is, if you were to try to name a top skill for somebody looking to enter into this area of the law, would you be able to come up with one, Hillary?
You know, I'm kind of thinking back to when I was in law school, and the whole point of law school is to teach you how to think critically, albeit logically. And that mode of thinking is lucrative to success in this space because of the regulatory aspect. And rule drafting, even statutory drafting, is prone to error and ambiguity because it's being drafted by humans. So your ability to look at terms, shoehorn them into given situations, and really to not necessarily be creative, but to think practically around the rules and play that game of chess relative to the regulatory bright lines versus what's happening in a given business and the federal conflict, incredibly important. And I really don't think you can be successful without that, because you need to be more than a scrivener and more than a translator. You really have to think through the regulations when it comes to compliance and also running the business relative to the clients.
Yeah, interesting. Kat, what do you think?
I agree. I think that even for me in this role as a public administrator, part of what my day-to-day job is just problem solving and problems that haven't been figured out yet. And I think that the chess game that Hillary referenced is absolutely right. The reality is that even regulators are implementing these policies for the first time, and so there's a lot of regulatory interpretation that's happening from all stakeholders who are involved in the conversation. And as we go through these different processes of administrating policies for the first time and implementing policies for the first time, we're learning lessons. And that means, hopefully, right, that policies change. And so the ability to actively be able to kind of issue spot and identify problems, and then to be able to effectively communicate and share those policies with electeds and regulators. I think this is part of what's fueling a lot of the reform that's happening and that's necessary. So problem solving and critical thinking and the ability to effectively communicate, I think, are top skills for folks who would be engaging in work similar to my role.
I think the law professors will be very cheered by what you guys had to say, since more and more we're focusing on practical skills and asking law schools to do a little bit more on that front. But I'm hearing a real focus on thinking here, which is good. The last question is, how has association or organization involvement helped you build your career? You want to start, Kat?
Sure. So I think that part of what brought me into this space and how I was able to kind of navigate moving from Ohio to Los Angeles and helping to coordinate and facilitate this conversation is that I was surrounding myself with folks who shared my values and policy priorities. And part of this work, because there are so many different stakeholders involved, the network of subject matter experts and folks that you have around you are critically important. I have to engage again with electeds and community-based organizations and neighborhood councils, and part of what I do on a regular basis is to try and move this conversation in a direction of progress. And in order to do that, it really takes a collective effort. There's a lot of collective leadership that's necessary at all levels of government. And so being able to rely on different partners and associations and organizations that support that work is critically important. I am actively living a process of bringing stakeholders in front of elected officials to try and shift and coordinate a change of policy.
Excellent. Hillary, what do you think?
I think, depending on the association or organization, they're incredibly key to staying in the know and for being able to discuss intelligently emerging issues versus hearsay. There's a tremendous amount of hearsay in the cannabis industry, just from state to state relative to local politics and what the feds may or may not do. So, that brain trust in some of these organizations is incredibly helpful just to keep you up to date on salient issues and what's reality versus not. And I will say some organizations out there are probably maybe not worth your time or money, but if you can do the vetting and find ones that really are kind of on your mission in the law or that are focused on issues that you care about, that are active and meaningfully taking action in these contexts, then by all means join it, because all lines of communication you can have are going to keep you on your toes in your practice.
Let me ask a general question that really applies to all practices and all industries, and particularly industry focus. How do you both recommend becoming more visible, building network and, other than perhaps attending some of the conferences that exist, and there are many, writing, speaking, how would you go about it? You want to start, Hillary?
Sure. I was pretty aggressive in the marketing space, and arguably I'm a better marketer than I am lawyer, depending on who you talk to. But writing, speaking, and especially if you're young, unfortunately, you don't have the gravitas to be choosy. Take any opportunity. It's always amazing to practice. It doesn't matter. Get up there, get your speech canned, and take it on the road, and you'll get better every single time you do it. I will say with these emerging industries that are incredibly interesting, you may even land yourself a TED Talk or something similar with thought leaders. Take advantage of that. Be fearless. Even if you screw up on stage, it's immaterial. And always writing will get you incredible visibility because there's so much untapped information out there. So I'd say, Betsy, those are two of the major things that lawyers can do that are not a major time suck that can pay huge dividends.
Yeah, it's immensely helpful. I'd also recommend that you take your content, whatever it is, and even if you just want to express yourself in short bursts, and use LinkedIn to do that. If your target audience is present there, they're watching, the GCs are watching on mute, but they're there. And if you could start expressing yourself and blogging perhaps the way that Hillary has, and getting the stuff out on different platforms and not just Law 360 or whatever industry newsletter you can find, but on LinkedIn. It's one possible tool. Kat, what's your experience on this been?
I've really been a fan of kind of physically placing myself in proximity to people who are leading the work and who are change makers in this space. So I would go out of my way to try and find events that were going on, and they didn't necessarily have to be happening outside of the state or anything like that. But I did find the kind of traditional mechanism of going and just being in the same room early on being extremely impactful to just the network that I was able to build.
And I would recommend to all of you who are listening, and we're kind of wrapping up at this point, that if you want to just get some ideas in general, that you go online and look up these two amazing women. And I say this honestly, they're amazing. And I don't always say that, but I'm old enough to know. Go online and look them up, and you'll see what they've done with their careers and the achievements that they can boast at this time. And you can do that too. Let them be your guides a little bit, because they've done a wonderful job of promoting their own experiences and their own expertise. I thank you both so much. This has been really illuminating, and I hope it's been as helpful to people who haven't yet developed their practices as it has been to me, looking at what you do, and hopefully being able to advise others through what I've learned today. Thank you both, and turn this back over to Joshua.
Thank you to Betsy for moderating, and thank you, Hillary and Kat, for showing your insights, and to everyone else for attending today's webinar. I just wanted to read out some new programs we have coming up real quick. So we do have a juvenile justice webinar coming up on the 31st of January, child welfare career choice series coming up on February 22nd, and a healthcare law career choice series webinar coming up on the 6th of March. In addition, we also have two new programs coming up for the career development series. We have the key strategies to coping with depression and maintaining wellness on February 14th, and taking charge of your own career, then that's Friday, March 13th. You can connect with us on social media to receive the latest updates on our upcoming programs as mentioned. And you can also learn more about our board who helps make programs like these possible. Check out our leadership page on our website. And lastly, before leaving, please feel free to complete our short survey. Thank you again and have a great week.